Right now, Putin has taken on Nato, the invasion of Europe. The Kremlin's complete madness has begun. Trump is at his limit and Russia's dictator is in a panic. If Britain strikes Russia hard, it will destroy the Kremlin's economy. The front has started to collapse and the Russian army is on the brink. The Ukrainian armed forces have crushed Putin's elite units. All of this and more coming up in our program Hotspot. Shock, invasion of Finland. Putin's plan revealed. This is the new reality, and the Kremlin is literally preparing to attack NATO at this very moment. Russia is already building secret bases on the alliance's borders. Large-scale preparations for a new war are in full swing. We will tell you what is already known and what this could mean for Europe. All the most important information right now.
While the whole world is focused on the war in Ukraine, Russia is quietly opening a new zone of tension in the Arctic, on the border with Finland. The Kremlin is building up its forces. Satellite images analyzed by the New York Times confirm these are not temporary maneuvers. This is the foundation for something bigger.
At this moment, it is Ukraine that is defending Europe, and that's a fact.
Just a few kilometers from the Finnish border, in Kamenka and Alakurti, hundreds of new tents have been set up, warehouses with equipment have been built, as well as hangars and shelters for fighter jets. And at a helicopter base that had been abandoned for almost 2 decades, combat vehicles can once again be seen. The scale of construction and the concentration of forces indicate that these are not temporary maneuvers, but rather a long-term strategy by Moscow, supposedly in response to NATO expansion, which the Kremlin views as a threat.
Russian troops are reinforcing bases and building military infrastructure near the Finnish border, which may reveal their strategy regarding what will happen after the war in Ukraine, writes the New York Times.
Finland joined NATO just 2 years ago and is already facing the threat of a troublesome neighbor. Its border with Russia, the longest in the alliance at 1,270 kilometers, is turning into a new line of potential conflict. And although there is no direct aggression yet, Helsinki is being mentioned more and more often in NATO statements.
It's important to understand that back in the Soviet era, the only border the Soviet Union and later Russia had with NATO was on the Kola Peninsula. Well, let's not count Poland. And that was a very, very small border with a corresponding climate. Obviously, no one expected any large-scale offensives there. It was roughly the same kind of border as the one somewhere out there in the Bering Strait between the Soviet Union and the United States. So hardly anyone paid much attention to it. But considering that Europe still existed, the Soviet Union did have some options there. In Soviet times, there was the so-called Leningrad Military District. Recently, Putin made the decision to restore this district, which had once been disbanded because of the friendly relations with Finland. I don't know, no one was threatening them at the time, but the situation has changed. Sweden and Finland have joined NATO.
Moscow is systematically strengthening its northern flank. According to Finnish military estimates, they have about 5 years before Russia is able to deploy forces at the border that could pose a direct threat.
In Russia, there is a very big problem with human resources departments. Over the past 3 years, they have either been almost entirely destroyed or worn down to such an extent that there are practically no professional officers or enlisted personnel, sergeants and rank-and-file soldiers left. That's why the army has to be rebuilt from scratch. A decision was made that the Finnish direction would be the testing ground where the army would begin to recover to the state that in their view an army should have. They have increased the number of personnel in accordance with their law on the armed forces. They are trying to build up some mechanized units, although they are not very successful at it, because if you look at how many tanks are destroyed in a month, it's actually 1.5 to 2 times more than Russia can restore or produce new tanks. All of this is truly concerning regarding the possibility of a theoretical strike in this direction.
Similar signs of activity are already appearing at the borders with Estonia, and the situation there is even more alarming.
This border, first of all, is the least protected. That's one thing. And secondly, there is no border agreement between Russia and Estonia. In 1940, when Estonia was annexed, 20% of the territory of the then Estonian Republic was transferred to Soviet Russia, to the Pskov region. And Estonia still demands the return of its territories from Russia. So theoretically, there is indeed some possibility of conflict there, and no one rules out the crossing of the border by so-called little green men.
Despite the exhaustion of its economy and army, the Kremlin remains resolute. For the sake of imperial ambitions, Putin is ready to throw everything and everyone under the wheels.
We take all types of threats seriously. We are, of course, closely monitoring this. We maintain communication with partners from Finland, the Baltic countries, Poland, and so on. That is, we also keep in contact with other NATO countries. In other words, with the alliance, with the main elites, whether it's Berlin, Paris, or Washington. So basically, the situation is not new, and we are moving very consistently towards strengthening our defense capabilities.
It cannot be ruled out that Russia is preparing for a major war with NATO. According to Germany's Federal Intelligence, the Kremlin views the conflict with the West as systemic and could be ready for a full-scale confrontation by the end of the decade. According to Lithuanian intelligence estimates, Moscow is not yet capable of attacking the entire alliance, but may try to test NATO with a limited attack on one or several countries. And while Ukraine is holding back the Russian army in the south and east, the next act of aggression is already unfolding in the north.
Putin's fiasco. A fateful phone call proved fatal for the Kremlin. Immediately after the conversation with Trump, the EU struck Russia hard. The Russian economy began to crack, and the Shadow Fleet appears to be dead. Britain also showed no mercy to the Kremlin. But the main intrigue is that the states are ready to walk away from the negotiations. Trump spoke about a red line, and this could change everything. What is the head of the White House hiding? Watch this. They addressed each other by name, and neither wanted to be the first to hang up. Here's what Ushakov said, revealing important details of the phone conversation between Putin and Trump. But as for the Kremlin dictator himself, nothing new.
The conversation was very constructive, again, and I rate it highly. The question, of course, is that both the Russian and Ukrainian sides should show the utmost desire for peace.
It is also known that before the conversation between the US and Russia took place, the president of Ukraine spoke with the president of the United States.
I asked him before his conversation with Putin not to make any decisions about Ukraine without us, and for us these are matters of principle.
But apparently that conversation didn't really help Trump get a grip, because he in turn called Putin a gentleman and spoke about the prospects of cooperation and trade with Russia. After all, its potential is limitless.
Trump is used to counting money, and our, let's say, even many foreign policy issues. Trump still views through the lens of money. So yes, that's why in this negotiation process, which took place during the phone conversation between Trump and Putin, the topic of economic cooperation, so to speak, was very important for Trump.
But that's not all. Ukraine is no longer surprised. But European leaders were stunned by the results of the talks between Trump and Putin. And even more so by the fact that the US is not going to impose sanctions against Russia. After all, Trump believes in Putin's intentions for peace.
There were, so to speak, warnings. Many experts even stated that the Europeans might also be guided by this position following the results of the phone talks. And today, literally just an hour or an hour and a half ago, the Europeans adopted a new 17th package of sanctions. The Europeans understand very clearly the risks posed by the Russian Federation, but above all, the risks related to security.
Trump also stated that he has a red line in his mind, after which he will stop putting pressure on Ukraine and Russia. But what exactly is this line? No one knows.
Why is it actually difficult to determine the direction and the width of the red lines that Trump was asked about? Because even after his talks with Putin, he commented on these possible red lines in several of his statements, and each time in a completely different way.
But for the European Union, that's not the only surprise. After all, Trump believes that this is not his war, no, but Europe's.
I'm telling you, there are big egos involved. But I think something will happen. And if it doesn't, I'll just step back. And they'll have to keep going. Again, this was a European matter, and it should have remained a European matter.
But who knows, maybe Europe will do a better job supporting Ukraine and putting pressure on Russia.
It is effective when, the collective West is united in its position, united in its intention to end the war, and moreover, to hold the Russian Federation accountable, in general, in principle, for starting it and for all the evil it has brought over these more than 10 years of war against Ukraine.
But here's the news. Is Russia really ready to work on a ceasefire with Ukraine?
An agreement was reached with the President of the United States that Russia would propose and is ready to work with the Ukrainian side on a memorandum regarding a possible future peace treaty.
Is this really true? Actually, no. No, it just seemed that way. No deadlines are provided here.
There are none, and there can't be. It's clear that everyone wants to do this as quickly as possible. But, of course, the devil is in the details.
How realistic is this memorandum in principle?
Basically, if we sum up what Trump agreed to after his phone call with Putin, it's that they agreed to keep negotiating, and that in these ongoing negotiations, the issue of a comprehensive ceasefire remains on the table. But whether or not a compromise can actually be reached on this issue, Trump is now shifting that responsibility to bilateral negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, thereby removing himself from political accountability.
It seems that peace exists only in words, and while the phone calls are certainly heartfelt, so far they haven't led to anything.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now. The Russian army is worn out. Relentless assaults have driven the occupiers into a dead end. This is no longer an offensive, but chaos on the verge of collapse. The occupiers are running out of steam. Ukrainian forces are showing their utmost. The defense is built like a wall. The Ukrainian armed forces are not just holding the line, they are smashing the enemy's reserves with pinpoint strikes, drones, and unconventional tactics. Putin is betting everything on the summer, but time is working against him. We will show the truth about what is happening at the front. Details, figures, and footage right now.
One shot, one end. A Ukrainian sniper stopped an MTLB from 1,700 meters away. On one of the front lines, an event took place that sounds like a legend, but is confirmed by facts. A Ukrainian sniper, armed with a rifle chambered for .50 caliber, accomplished something nearly impossible. From a distance of 1,700 meters in poor visibility conditions, he disabled the MTLB with a single shot. The shot was fired from an awkward position, but the result astonished even seasoned fighters. The vehicle stopped instantly, and the enemy radio chatter erupted with shouts of "the driver's head was blown off." This shot was made by the most experienced sniper in the unit, who at first himself couldn't believe he had hit so precisely. This isn't a tall tale, but a real example of what our warriors are capable of when they have the weapons, the skills, and cold determination. A Ukrainian legend has become reality. Meanwhile, even the Russian army can get tired. The constant assaults are taking their toll. The actions of the Russians at the front hardly resemble an organized offensive, which indicates the exhaustion of the occupying army. According to Andriy Beletsky, the actions of Russian troops at the front are looking less and less like a planned offensive, which in turn points to the depletion of the occupying forces. Despite the ongoing attacks on Ukrainian positions, it is already difficult to see any signs of an organized offensive campaign in these actions. Beletsky recalled that in February of 24, the Russians began their offensive on Avdiivka with overwhelming numerical and technical superiority. According to him, at that time, well-trained and high-quality manpower was deployed, along with massive stockpiles of ammunition and the daily use of up to 100 guided aerial bombs. This offensive moved forward like a steamroller for almost the entire year. However, at this point in his assessment, the situation has changed dramatically. Russia has suffered heavy losses both in equipment and in trained units. He notes that it is unclear whether the enemy has started the campaign for the 25th year or not. And this fact alone is already telling. According to him, Russia is losing valuable time during the favorable spring period. Currently, the occupiers' attacks appear disorganized and clumsy. On the battlefield, motorcycles and Chinese ATVs are increasingly being spotted, instead of full-fledged armored vehicles. At the same time, the invaders' losses remain catastrophic. Beletsky concludes that Russia is noticeably exhausted and has lost a significant part of its offensive potential. Putin is placing great hopes on the summer offensive and is confident that it will be successful. Russia continues to strive for the complete occupation of Donbass, as well as holding on to the captured parts of Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions. However, at the negotiations in Istanbul, the Russian delegation went even further. Its representatives declared their intention to seize the Kharkiv and Sumy regions, as well as to initiate the process of annexing them to the Russian Federation. At the same time, such threats are essentially devoid of any practical basis. The delegation was acting on orders from the Kremlin and was essentially trying to intimidate the Ukrainian side with the prospect of a large-scale summer offensive. Sumy and Kharkiv were specifically identified as the primary strategic objectives. However, Russia simply does not have enough resources to carry out such plans. Moreover, even the possibility of consolidating control in the Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, Donetsk, and partially in the Luhansk regions is considered highly unrealistic. In order to launch a full-scale offensive operation in the Kharkiv and Sumy directions, Russia would have to mobilize up to 250,000 additional servicemen, even by the most conservative estimates. It is impossible to do this without weakening other sections of the front, especially considering that Ukrainian forces are eliminating up to 1/400 enemy personnel every day. This amounts to about 40,000 soldiers per month. A full-fledged army that Russia is unable to replenish with the necessary quality and equipment. Meanwhile, Ukrainian defenses in these directions are organized effectively. The defenders have fortified their positions, use unconventional tactics to strike at reserves moving toward the front line, and are actively employing reconnaissance, missiles, and drones. All available resources, from aviation to modern unmanned systems, are being used to preempt any enemy threats both on the ground and in the air. Meanwhile, on the 1181st day of the war, the front remains extremely tense. In the past day alone, there have been 175 combat engagements. The Russians carried out 78 airstrikes, dropped 124 glide bombs, launched nearly 3,000 kamikaze drones, and conducted more than 5,100 DIA artillery shellings. The main directions of the attacks are the east and south of Ukraine. The greatest pressure is on the Pokrovsk, Lyman, and Kursk directions. Active assaults have also been recorded near Kharkiv, Kramatorsk, Toretsk, and Kupiansk. Despite the intense pressure, the armed forces of Ukraine are holding the defensive line, delivering precise strikes on concentrations of enemy forces, command posts, equipment, and artillery. It is worth noting that the unmanned systems units of the 11th Brigade, named after Mikhailo Hrushevsky, of the National Guard of Ukraine, delivered 320 fire strikes on the southern front in just 1 week. 248 enemy personnel locations were destroyed or damaged, along with 19 observation posts, 16 vehicles, 14 antennas, 6 mortars, 2 Tiger armored combat vehicles, ammunition depots, satellite communication systems, generators, and much more. Also noteworthy are the actions in March and April in the Pokrovsk direction, when FPV drone operators from the 55th Separate Artillery Brigade Zaporizhzhia Sich eliminated 91 occupiers, with just as many wounded. Overall, Russian losses for the day amounted to 1,040 personnel, 1 tank, 5 armored combat vehicles, 118 UAVs, and 88 pieces of equipment. Ukraine continues to wear down the enemy and confidently holds the defense. And you can catch more news tomorrow.
Read even more high-profile events on the Times of Ukraine Telegram channel. Only the latest news and verified information. The link is in the description below the video. Urgently march on Kyiv. Putin is plotting something terrible. It is already known how and when the enemy might strike. The details are coming up right now. Meanwhile, as Russia's super missile misfired, new Shaheds with dual warheads are taking to the skies. Their power now far surpasses anything seen before. The details will surprise you. And that's not all. Putin is urgently redeploying elite units to the front. What is he planning and how will Ukraine respond? Find out next.
Russia is once again blackmailing Ukraine with a large-scale offensive along the entire front line. There are opinions that Poltava and the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv, could be under threat.
The resources of the Russian army are being depleted one way or another. And in any case, we are talking about the fact that the offensive impulses Russia is showing today are clearly not enough to carry out full-fledged operational tactical level operations. Obviously, the Russian strategic offensive operation, meanwhile, is still ongoing.
In addition to threats to use the RS-24 Yars missile with a possible nuclear warhead against Ukraine, Russian forces have begun employing a new tactic to exhaust Ukrainian troops. These are breakthroughs using motorcycles, buggies, and scooters. Considering that the Yars missile never actually launched from the test site, while the scooters at least managed to move, the latter idea is more advantageous for Russia.
This so-called summer campaign, or rather yet another summer campaign by the enemy, is indeed entering its active phase, and it is clear that the priorities right now are attempts to fully occupy the Donetsk and Luhansk regions.
After analyzing the situation, the Institute for the Study of War concluded that Russia is not agreeing to a ceasefire before peace negotiations in order to advance on the battlefield and secure concessions from Ukraine and its partners.
We can see how complicated the situation has become right now for us in the Pokrovsk direction, because the enemy is managing to cut off logistics on the Kostiantynivka-Pokrovsk highway. In fact, it's clear that the battle for Kostiantynivka, which we've been talking about, has thus indeed already begun.
No matter how Russia advances, the Ukrainian armed forces are confidently eliminating the occupiers from our land. 1,030 Russian invaders were eliminated in the past 24 hours. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, Russia has lost more than 975,000 soldiers killed and wounded in its war against Ukraine.
The enemy's attempts have not gone unnoticed and are being assessed by our command accordingly, so that we can counter them in defense with our forces and resources in order to prevent a breakthrough and the collapse of the front. These are our main tasks for today, accordingly, as well as the goal of exhausting the enemy's resources as much as possible.
The Ukrainian armed forces are also achieving tactical successes in the so-called liberated, according to Russian statements, Kursk region. Recently, Ukrainian soldiers advanced to the southern outskirts of the settlement of Tetkino in the Kursk region. However, the Russians also had certain successes there. Specifically, advances by the occupiers toward the international border checkpoint, southeast of Tetkino, were recorded.
The main thing is that this border area remains partly under the control of the defense forces. The defense forces continue to carry out their assigned tasks. The Kursk operation is not over. I would also add here that in this regard, I consider the Belgorod situation together as well.
The occupiers have reduced infantry assaults, but increased the number and scale of air and artillery strikes in the Kupiansk area. However, in the Borova area, Ukrainian forces have recently achieved successes. It has been confirmed that the defenders have advanced west of Sergeyevka.
Well, the Kupiansk direction is one of the priorities for the Russians in this offensive campaign. In this wave, another wave of their summer offensive. Accordingly, as I already mentioned, the enemy will continue trying to advance further in the direction of Borova and Kupiansk accordingly.
According to reports from the General Staff, the aggressor is now being forced to transfer reserves to the Kursk region from other directions, in particular airborne troops and naval infantry, which were supposed to reinforce offensive actions in the Toretsk, Pokrovsk, and Orekov directions. Despite the fact that the Russian army also continues combat operations in the directions of 4 key industrial cities in the Donetsk region, these are Kostiantynivka, Druzhkivka, Kramatorsk, and Slovyansk.
Europe has shifted to a war footing. The US and Germany have shocked the Kremlin with a new alliance. Missile production in the very heart of Europe. Germany and the US are creating a secret weapons facility that could completely change the balance of power on the front lines. Putin is furious now there will be more strikes and less time to respond. What are Berlin and Washington planning, and what does it mean for Russia? Details of the explosive agreement right now.
Ukraine is defending itself against the Russian Federation. Israel and Taiwan are in need of American weaponry. Taiwan is arming itself due to threats from China, and Israel, after the Hamas attack, is conducting a major operation. Because of the scale of threats around the world, the US is running low on precision weapons.
If to apply for everything, if you look at the stocks of American military weapons manufacturers after Munich, you'll see that many dropped over the course of a month, some by as much as 80%. They understand that there are no clear signals from the administration regarding procurement. That's why they will also join our side.
Rheinmetall is ramping up gunpowder production. Rheinmetall plans to repurpose 2 of its factories that currently produce automotive parts. In Germany, a railway plant will be converted to manufacture components for Leopard 2 main battle tanks and Puma infantry fighting vehicles.
We have no interest in Poland, Latvia, or anywhere else.
Why would we need that? We simply have no interests, only threats.
Due to the threat from Putin's Russia, Europe has shifted to a war footing.
If we have HIMARS systems, then we will definitely be buying American missiles. If we have European systems, then, naturally, we will be buying European ones. The problem is that Europe has never produced such a quantity of air defense systems.
To reduce dependence on the US and speed up supplies, some of the world's leading manufacturers of munitions, ground systems, and defense electronics, along with the global defense technology and innovation company Rheinmetall and Lockheed Martin, have signed a memorandum of understanding. The German arms concern Rheinmetall and the American Defense Corporation Lockheed Martin have decided to create a joint venture to produce missiles in Europe.
Sometimes you have to wait 10 years to get missiles from America. That's far too long. That's why both partners wanted to establish a European Center of Excellence for missiles.
Lockheed Martin has confirmed that it is working with European allies to meet global demand for American munitions and precision strike capabilities.
This partnership reflects our commitment to advancing transatlantic security and providing proven state-of-the-art capabilities to our allies. This is a step toward helping our European customers fulfill their commitments to NATO. By combining Rheinmetall's expertise with Lockheed Martin's advanced missile technologies, we are creating a solid foundation to meet ever-evolving security needs. This partnership will strengthen the defense industry and create jobs in both the US and Europe.
Lockheed Martin has been a partner of German industry for more than 50 years and continues to develop these partnerships. Rheinmetall will hold 60% of the joint venture. A special focus will be placed on the production of long-range missiles, which are needed by Ukraine and European countries.
They want to effectively launch a new industrialization policy to reopen weapons production that had previously been shut down.
After this collaboration, there will definitely be no problems with ammunition. The plant will produce powerful ATACMS and GMLRS shells for the HIMARS and M270 MLRS multiple launch rocket systems. Lockheed Martin has decided to stop producing ATACMS in America and is starting to manufacture the newer PAR-SM. In this regard, the possibility of fulfilling American contracts at the new plant is being discussed. They also plan to produce Hellfire missiles for drones and aircraft. Their range is the greatest among similar weapons in the United States. There are also plans to produce PAC-3 missiles for Patriot East air defense systems in Europe.
We understand that selling weapons is a matter of politics. I always say, we understand that selling weapons is a matter of politics. I always say that it's easy to buy a pistol, a submachine gun, or an assault rifle. But there are also serious things like air defense systems, intelligence data, and aircraft. That's already politics, not just weapons. And also a politician who is not a fool.
In the 3 years since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, it has become clear that it is precisely these missiles that are lacking to hold the defense on the ground. The capacity of the new plant in Europe will be quickly filled by orders from Ukraine, which has a high demand for Patriot missiles.
Right now, Europe does not have the capacity to meet our needs with its own production, so that we could stop buying weapons from the US.
The intellectual property rights, meanwhile, will belong to the European side. The production line will be ready in 12 to 13 months. Engine production will begin in 2026 and missile production in 2027. The planned capacity is up to 10,000 missiles and the same number of U rocket engines per year.
Russia has never threatened anyone.
despite the fact that Ukraine is making purchases from the US and the European Union. The development of Ukraine's defense industry, is not standing still and has become a national idea. The Ministry of Defense previously noted that every second piece of ammunition on the front is produced in Ukraine.
We manufacture barrels for self-propelled artillery, and we also produce ammunition. But the issue of quantity, timing, and more specialized types.
Europe's demand for ammunition will only continue to grow, and as for Ukraine, its experience in combat operations against the aggressor will allow the Ukrainian defense industry to be integrated into the European defense sector.
Trump explodes. Putin under fire. The US president issues a tough ultimatum. Donald Trump is losing patience with Putin. The dictator is once again dodging peace and running away from negotiations on Ukraine. But now even the White House's patience is at its limit. What will all this mean for Moscow? Watch this.
Before Donald Trump's phone call to the Russian dictator, Alexander Stubb tried to prove that Russia is no longer a superpower. The president of Finland stated this at a security conference in Tallinn. On May 19th, Donald Trump held a phone conversation with Vladimir Putin. Afterwards, the US president promised that Moscow and Kiev would immediately begin peace negotiations. Earlier, Alexander Stubb advised the head of the White House not to overestimate Russia's capabilities during direct contacts with the Kremlin.
In terms of economic size, Russia is smaller than Italy, but larger than Spain. Militarily, it tried to deprive Ukraine of independent sovereignty and territorial integrity, as far back as 3 years ago. This year, it has advanced by less than 1 percentage point. Its interest rate is over 20%, and its reserves have run out. These are exactly the messages that need to be conveyed. It's not an easy game, but you have to keep engaging with the American administration. Alexander Stubb, president of Finland, at the security conference in Tallinn.
According to The Guardian, Stubb is one of those European leaders whom the US president listens to. Trump developed a friendly relationship with the president of Finland immediately after taking office. The informal meetings between the heads of state have already been dubbed Gulf diplomacy by the media after Stubb and Trump shared joint photos from a sports club in Florida. According to the president of Finland, this type of meeting makes it possible to convey a lot of important information to Trump, including matters related to Russia's war against Ukraine.
Of course, we talked about bilateral matters between Finland and the United States, we discussed NATO, and we also talked about Russia's aggressive war in Ukraine. So this is a normal diplomatic dialogue that you can have in such situations. And I believe it is the job of presidents to try to influence one another and to have these conversations.
Alexander Stubb has consistently supported Kyiv since the day he won the election. Finland is lobbying for Ukraine's accession to the EU and NATO. In March, Stubb and Zelensky held a meeting in Helsinki. The president of Finland stated that the country intends to put pressure on Russia until Moscow stops stalling peace negotiations.
Sanctions need to be strengthened, frozen assets should be used, and Ukraine must continue to be armed so that Russia understands it can no longer postpone a ceasefire or peace negotiations.
On May 19th, Helsinki announced a new military aid package for Ukraine worth 90 million euros. According to Defense Minister Antti Häkkinen, all the weapons will be of Finnish manufacture, and the package itself is funded from Russia's frozen assets.
This new package, together with our national support program amounting to 660 million euros, will allow for closer ties between Finnish industry and Finland's support for Ukraine. This is an excellent example of the capabilities of our defense industry, and it shows that our investments in ammunition production are bearing fruit. Antti Häkkinen, Minister of Defense of Finland, on the ministry's website.
Helsinki is also actively adopting the combat experience of the Ukrainian armed forces. During recent military exercises, the Finnish army trained to intercept drones using helicopters. Finland intends to systematically implement methods learned during Russia's war against Ukraine, according to the country's Ministry of Defense.
Lessons from the war in Ukraine are being put into practice. At the ADX Mallet Strike 1-25, exercises, joint counter-drone operations are being practiced using various means. The Uti Jaeger Regiment will also participate in the exercises with its own counter-drone equipment. The Finnish Army Command allowed on social network X.
The start of Russia's aggression against Ukraine was perceived in Helsinki as a major threat to their own security as well. In 2023, the country abandoned its neutral status and joined NATO. Despite the initial reduction of military presence near the border with Finland, the Kremlin is now beginning to increase its troop numbers. According to the New York Times, Moscow is reactivating its military bases within 50 kilometers of the border, rebuilding infrastructure and bringing in equipment. Analysts believe that Russia could invade Finnish territory within just 5 years. Andriy Dimitrenko for Freedom TV channel.
That's all for now. And for more breaking news from the front, tune in to our next broadcast.